Welcome to Great Practice, Great Life by Atticus Incorporated.
Hey, it's Steve Riley. Welcome to this episode of Great Practice, Great Life. Sometimes not so great. So this is just you and me, and we're talking about a couple of things. But the first thing I want to do is thank you for showing up. I know you're invested in having a great life and a great practice, and 99% of the time, how you get that is by showing up and doing the work. The work that you're doing right now, which is really opening up your mind, the possibilities of how to have a great life and great practice through the Atticus community, through the conversation of what a great life looks like to you. And today's episode is an unusual one. It's a different one in that it's going to be legacies and lessons from my father. Yeah, I lost my dad. We lost our father about a week ago, and there were phenomenally fun and interesting lessons that I shared and learned in preparing for his eulogy. And I thought I could share them with you. And I know we've all lost somebody, a dear friend, a spouse, and for some of us, even a child. And loss is universal. It's painful. It's devastating. It's one of the reasons this community exists, to support each other. And it was incredible to me not only to see my family, but my partners, my dear friends, of which I have friends that I've had for 40 years, 35, 25 years, business partners that were there for me. And it's really remarkable to feel pain in one moment and gratitude in another. So throughout this podcast and throughout this episode, I may be going up and down, and I apologize for that. I hope that you understand that my goal is here to share lessons from my dad, Don Riley, and how those lessons have shaped my life. And hopefully these lessons can help you on a path to have your great practice and great life. Now, I was going to call this episode Lies My Father Told Me, but that's not really fair. They were fables. They were parables. They were stories that shaped the way I live, lead, and think. And I hope they will be useful to you, entertaining to you. And at the end of each story or each life lesson, I'm going to encourage how you could apply these in your life and in your practice. So here we go. And once again, thanks for showing up. Thanks for supporting me. And thanks for, the community coming together and supporting us together. So here we go. I'll give you a brief background. My dad's Donald C. Riley. He's 92 at the time of his passing. He grew up in a little suburb of Cincinnati, Ohio. He was training in high school to be an apprentice in a print shop and got drafted at the age of 19. And at the age of 19, at the end of the Korean War, and he's still up to his 92nd birthday, was complaining about being drafted because the letter said, "Your friends and neighbors have selected you." And he would always say, "I kept trying to find who selected me to go serve in the Army." He ended up having an 8-year commitment with the military. However, the Korean War ended. He served for about a year and a half, and then was released from active duty to reserves and came out of the military a changed man. He decided to be a police officer. He had no college education, so he ultimately wanted to be an FBI agent. And so he became a police officer and started studying being a homicide detective, got certified to be a homicide detective. But in the process, met my mother, got married, had me. 10 months after getting married, had me, and would go to college during the day and work at night as a police officer. And so when I was 1, he basically ended up graduating with his college degree and wanted to be an FBI agent. At the time, the FBI would only take accountants and lawyers. And by just a wonderful fluke of happenstance, my father met an assistant director of the FBI at a lecture, told him he was trying to get into the bureau. The assistant director made a few phone calls and got my father in through what they called at the time a hardship exemption, or an experience exemption, because he had been a police officer for 8 to 9 years. And so he ended up becoming an FBI agent, served as an FBI agent for 21 years, and then at the age of 55 had mandatory retirement. Now, his career in the FBI will figure into some of his life lessons. One of the most fascinating things about my father is that he was in great shape. He exercised daily, he ran daily, he did everything he could do to stay in extremely good shape, and at the age of 40 became the oldest SWAT team commander in the United States, which is a pretty impressive feat because I know what my shape was like at age 40. And if you're younger than 40 or above 40, just imagine what it takes to be a SWAT team commander, being able to rappel out of a helicopter with equipment and a machine gun, an AR-15 strapped to your back. So there's some there's some things that you have to do that really, really impacted his behaviors, and he was really quite the athlete too. Age 55, he basically went from the Bureau, because he had mandatory retirement, into a different career, which we'll talk later in the episode about. But really what I want to share with you is some of the fascinating things that he did that shaped my life, my family's life, and were absolutely hysterically funny, but didn't appear to be funny at the time. So here's the first story. Picture me and my siblings, my sister Amy, my brother Jay, my other sister Kim, the four of us being young kids bouncing around, making all kinds of racket at the kitchen table. And my father, who just got home from work wearing his tie still, had his proverbial scotch before dinner. He would have a scotch, then read the newspaper. Then you were allowed to talk to him. And then we will all come to the kitchen counter, sit down, and my mom had made dinner, and we're sitting there, and we were constantly being reminded by our mother to use good manners, and we would constantly sit on our legs, like a kid. You're sitting around, sitting on your legs, and you're not, sitting properly. So you kind of have your feet tucked under me. And my dad looks at us and goes, "If you kids keep sitting like that, you'll get Jake leg." Yep, Jake leg, Jake leg, Jake leg. And my father said it's a condition one of the neighborhood kids developed because they sat like that. Now, none of us bought into this argument very intensely, but about a week later, we're walking through the grocery store, and it was my father and all the kids, and some poor guy goes by with polio, and he's wearing leg braces. And Dad looks at him, looks at us, and goes, "Jake leg." And that was it. That night when my father said, "Hey, you're going to develop Jake leg," we all sat properly. Now, this particular behavior modification worked brilliantly until I got to college. And you have to understand, I trusted my father. If he told me I could develop Jake leg by sitting with my feet tucked under me, I believed him. So I basically got to a point where I believed it until college. And at college, I got educated by a biology professor that there's no such thing as Jake leg, and my father was probably pulling my leg. And so I couldn't believe it. I was like, wow, that's incredible. So when I saw my father, I said, "Hey," when I came home for Christmas break, I said, "Hey, Jake leg's not real." And he laughed. He laughed at me. He goes, "Well, imagine I had the four of you guys and I couldn't get you to behave. And I made up the story to get you guys to behave." And I was like, "Oh my God, I can't believe that." Well, it worked brilliantly. And I said, "Do you tell us anything else?" And of course he said, "No, of course not. That was the only story I ever made up." Not so true. Not so true. Now, what does this have to do with you? Well, my father tried to get us to behave by direct discipline, and it didn't, because we didn't notice any short-term consequences. So what my dad did was he developed a long-term consequence, one that looked brutal, and just reinforced it. So if your rules aren't working, paint a vivid emotional picture of the long-term costs of what the consequences will be of ignoring your rules. Now, you can use this with your kids, as my father did, and with your clients and with anyone else in life, because this was not a true story. It was a parable, something my father made up. Now, I will tell you the other story that I fell for from my father. That story that you just heard was referenced famously in the family as the Jake leg story. Now, I was an athlete growing up, and I really wanted to be a great basketball player. I really wanted to be a tremendous athlete, but I loved skateboarding. I also like surfing. I grew up in a beach town, grew up in Daytona Beach, and I loved skateboarding, and all my friends skateboarded. And my father kept saying, son, you're going to crack your skull open. You're going to break your kneecaps. You're going to break a leg. Skateboarding is not something you want to do. It's not conducive for a long-term athlete. But I loved it and I kept doing it. So one night over dinner, my dad turned to my mom, who was a nurse, and said, hey, did you see the Bob Smith kid today in surgery? My mom goes, yeah, it's a terrible, terrible thing, but we shouldn't talk about it in front of the kids. Well, what do you think happened? All the kids were rapt with attention. What happened? What happened? My mom said, Don, I don't think you should tell the kids about it. And my dad goes, I think they're old enough to know these things. Here's what happened, kids. Bob Smith's son, Johnny, was skateboarding, and Johnny was going to be a pro baseball player. He's older than you guys. He's a really great athlete. He was an all-star in the county. He was a great, great pitcher, great catcher, just a great, great baseball player. But he was skateboarding, and he fell off the skateboard and broke both kneecaps, both of them. He'll be able to walk again. The surgeons fix it so he'll be able to walk again, but he'll never be able to play baseball ever again. Now, of course, the next day, I put my skateboard up on the side of the garage and never touched it again. Never touched it again. It never occurred to me till years later that it was another fable that my father made up. Once again, he thought through, okay, I can't get through the kids by directly telling them something. So he made up a story that was totally fictional, got my mom to buy into it, who we totally trusted. The two of them clearly conspired about this at some point in time. It totally snookered us into this particular conversation about the skateboard. Now, fables can be used to drive all kinds of behaviors, negative behaviors, positive behaviors. As I mentioned earlier, I wanted to be a great basketball player, but I lacked one critical thing. One of the challenges that you have in growing your practice, trying to make more money, trying to have a great life, is how do you stay focused and not frantic? It's a big challenge. So for a moment, I just want to talk to you about one of the tools that we recommend. It's transformative for anyone that adopts it and uses it. And it's called the My Great Life Focus. It is designed specifically by lawyers for lawyers. This is how it works. Inside of this is a focusing concept that helps you stay focused on the most important goals for you. It actually coaches you on things like prompts and questions, and it gives you an actionable plan how to achieve them. The goal here is for you to produce high impact results, not another ever-ending to-do list. You have to-do lists in your task management in your CRMs. You have to-do lists being flung at you. Really what you're trying to do is get focused and decide what are the most important things to you. And this tool is designed to help you gain better control over your time and focus, strike the balance between your work and personal life, help you elevate your marketing, help you build a more focused team and improve your strategic delegation. It helps you boost your cash flow and profitability while creating the life you enjoy. So I know we talked about this tool in other episodes. You've heard a lot of our members talk about this tool. Some of you are like going, oh my God, it's a paper planner. Yeah, it's paper. And there's a reason for it being paper, because I want you to step away from the screens. I want you to take a moment to make good decisions and decide what does a great week, a great day look like to you. So you can get the planner. I'm going to put a link in the show notes. You can get a subscription. If you're a member, it's included. So take advantage of the member. And if you start a subscription, I'm just going to tell you, it will change your life. I've been using it for 20 years, and I just could not imagine my life without this particular tool. With that, I'm going to encourage you to get started building that great practice and great life by using the most foundational transformative tool, which is the My Great Life Focus. But I lacked one critical thing: talent. And I worked hard, I played hard, and I started looking at some of the other athletes around, and I was like, oh my God, I just don't have the talent. And then, of course, I was cursed with a younger brother who is taller, better looking. You can ask his wife, Tina Riley, some of you know, much more popular, much more intelligent, and just a gifted athlete, taller, just a gifted. And I complained to my father, like, I drew the short cards. Like, I'm not that tall. I'm not that good looking. I'm not that athletic. And he got all the good cards. Like, what happened? And my dad goes, hey, look, let me tell you a story about Pete Rose. Now, my dad grew up 2 doors down from Pete Rose, and Pete Rose was a legendary baseball player. His nickname was Charlie Hustle. And my father had nicknamed him Repeat. One of the difficult things of being with my father is my father gave everybody a nickname. And he called Pete Rose Repeat because Pete's dad was Pete. And so they called Pete Jr. Repeat. And they played baseball together. My dad took Pete Rose to baseball games, and, they had a young friendship. And this was confirmed years and years later when we actually met Pete Rose at the height of his career and got a tour, got to meet all the Cincinnati Reds players, Johnny Bench, Jose Concepcion, Joe Morgan, you name him, we met him. We got autographed baseballs. It was like a big deal for us as kids. But my father would always say that Pete Rose's older brother was like my younger brother, a talented athlete. And Pete had to outwork him. So Pete had to outwork him every day, and that's why they called Pete Charlie Hustle, because Pete had to outwork all the talented players, because Pete wasn't naturally that talented. What he did was outwork everybody. So I completely, utterly used that fable for my entire life until about a week ago. As I was working on my father's eulogy, I was thinking about lessons I'd learned, stories I'd learned from him, and I went, no, it can't be possible. And I know you're way ahead of me on this, but of course, I Googled whether or not Pete Rose had an older brother, and you probably have guessed it, he did not. My father made up a fable, total fable, about how outwork and hustling will beat talent every single time. My father was like, show up, follow through, keep going when everybody fades and gives up, because you being persistent and outworking everybody else will beat talent. All right. That fable has been driving me. That story has been driving me my entire life. And I just found out a week to 10 days ago, it was a total, utter fable. Now, it doesn't mean that the lesson's not a great lesson, because I think he was totally correct. That talent is one thing, hustle plus talent's another thing. And a lot of people will outwork, out hustle, show up like you do, and do the work necessary, because talented people sometimes won't show up, won't do the work because they're naturally talented. And you see this over and over and over. And I think my father had seen that over and over and over in his career and made up this fable, one that he knew I would totally buy into hook, line, and sinker, which I did for 50 years. Now, it's a pretty good one. I think I'm going to ignore the facts and just go with the fable, because the fable itself is far more powerful, and the lesson of the fable is far more powerful than the fact that Pete didn't have an older brother. So the next fable is the one that got me in the most trouble, though. My father would always tease my mother, because my mother was German and would sometimes get really, really intense about stuff. And my father told me that when my wife turned age 50, I could trade her in for 2 25-year-olds. Now, I have discovered that's not true either. My wife has pointed this out. Other people have pointed this out. So you don't even have to point this one out. I didn't have to Google it. I realized that was a total fable, but my dad would say it all the time just to try and get my mom to calm down. So it was a classic thing that he would say. Craziest darn thing to say. I don't know why mom didn't trade him in, but he would constantly say that as like a joke just to calm her down and say, hey, look, everything's okay. Relax. Don't make me trade you in for 2 25-year-olds. It was mainly him yanking my mom's chain and trying to get her to relax. But one of my dad's greatest skills was using humor to try and defuse situations. So those were four remarkable fables that my father used. And I don't call them lies because they were fables. They were really things designed to tell certain lessons, and lessons that were really helpful. So for me, although trading your wife in at age 50 was in itself a fable and a joke, and the point of the story is intense moments, humor can be used to create space and to diffuse stress and to have better communication. And he was very good at that. He was very, very good at that. So let's talk about the next lesson I learned from my father. My father at age 55 had mandatory retirement from the FBI. Now, this was devastating to him because he loved being an FBI agent. If you asked him anything about his life and his career, other than the children and being married, he would talk about he was an FBI agent. He was proud of that. He was really proud of being part of the Bureau and what that meant. He was really remarkable as an agent and really achieved quite stellar outcomes. But at age 55, he is now kicked off the team and kicked off being a SWAT team commander. He's now done, and he's now released into industry. The sheriff at the time was a good friend of his, Ed Duff, and he was a sheriff of Volusia County. Ed and all the chiefs of police in the community went to my dad and wanted my dad to run for sheriff. My father was good friends with Ed Duff, the current sheriff, who decided he wanted to retire and step down, and had waited for my father to be in a position to run for sheriff. Now, my father is a quiet leader. He's not a politician. He's always been a one-on-one person. He's not a networker. He's not a in front of the crowd kind of guy. He's never been that guy. But all of his friends who were law enforcement leaders convinced him to run for sheriff. And he did. And he did his best. And he ran against a charismatic young state trooper who was making headlines for making drug busts on I-95 and would just pull over cars and make these big drug busts, and it would tip the newspaper off so the newspaper would be there. And basically what he was doing, and most, if not all, the arrests got overturned for racial profiling by the courts. But he got a lot of great press. And while most of those cases did not stick, the headlines did. And so this young man ran against my dad, and this young man knew how to campaign. He knew how to stir up crowds. He knew how to get headlines. He knew how to politic. He was very good at it. So he beat my father in this election. Now, here's the takeaway. Here's the lesson. My father said yes and had the courage to say yes and failed publicly for him in a very, very embarrassing way, because all of our neighbors were at the house when the results came in. All of his friends were there. And my long-term friend and neighbor, Norma Newfield, said that my father handled it with grace and elegance. And that he said, sometimes these things don't turn out well in life. I will find something else to do and find another way of serving and being helpful. So here's the takeaway. I was never prouder of him than that moment. He ran and failed publicly in a big way. And that gave me the courage as a young man to take risks. Because if my father, who I respected and was so proud of and am proud of, ran for sheriff and failed, I too can run and do something and fail. And I think because of his courage and failure, I had permission to fail. And I didn't really connect the dots till much later that his failure as sheriff was a courageous thing and something that I am still very proud of him for doing, because he could have been easily persuaded not to do that and just slip off into another job in law enforcement somewhere. But he ran, had the support of all the leaders, but that was not enough. And he failed. And because of that, he taught me a life lesson that it's okay to fail and fail big. From there, after failing, he became a private investigator ended up being a work comp fraud investigator for the Hotel Motel Association out of Orlando, Florida, and worked there till age 76. At age 76, he retired permanently because my mom's Alzheimer's had gotten so bad. And he got to a point where he needed to take care of her. But before we talk about my mom, I want to talk about one of the other lessons I learned from my father. My father was responsible for multiple high-profile arrests. He was in charge of the investigation to hunt down a man who killed 2 FBI agents in broad daylight. As a young agent, he was assigned to a case in which the 16-year-old daughter of a local bank president had been kidnapped. And the agents were trying to find her. And they captured the kidnapper, but he wouldn't give her up. But one of the family members of the kidnapper said that he had buried the girl alive in a cardboard box. And my father and 2 agents figured out where she was buried. And what the guy had done was put a tube in the ground, like a PVC tube. So there was air going into the girl in case he had to, pull her up. But his whole goal was to pull the tube out, bury her, and let her suffocate to death. So my father and 2 agents, in suits and ties at the time, found where she was at and dug her out with their bare hands. Saved the girl. Consequently gave my dad a tremendous fear of being buried alive. But the story I really want to share with you about this was how my father would approach problem solving from a really unique angle. Now, this particular story I found out about years later. But when I was about 13, 14 years old, my father didn't come home for Christmas. And in his line of work, it scares you as a kid. But my mother assured us that he would be home. He wasn't there for Christmas Eve day. He wasn't there for Christmas. But on Christmas Day, he was on the cover of the local newspaper with a headline where he and the SWAT team had arrested a FBI's top 10 most wanted fugitive in our town. Now, here's the interesting angle of the story. This gentleman's name was Thomas Knight. He was wanted allegedly for murder, bank robbery, and he was a young guy, in my recollection, in his late 20s. And everybody knew he was in the area, and they were trying to find him. Well, it was Christmas, and even bad guys loved their moms. And so they staked out his mom's house, and sure enough, he came home to visit his mom. Now, all the young guys in the SWAT team want to put on the bulletproof vest, break out some of their really good, cool gear, and bust down some doors and go get this guy. And my dad's like, no. Everybody calm down, put the safeties back on your guns, and let's think about this. Because my father believed sometimes the smartest move isn't always the loudest or the most heroic. So he thought about this, and Thomas is in there with his mom, younger siblings, possibly grandchildren. They're there for Christmas. And the last thing you want to do is bust down the door on Christmas Eve as a SWAT team. So my father came up with a plan, and he went down to the local liquor store, bought a whole bunch of liquor, and then had one of the SWAT team members with a bulletproof vest on and a jacket go up to the front door, knock on the door, and pretend that they had a liquor delivery. And the liquor delivery was paid for. And Thomas's mom argued with, the agent, the delivery guy, that no, you're at the wrong house. And he was like, look, no, I got the right address. It's all paid for. It's like a Christmas gift. Thomas, of course, hears somebody arguing with his mom, opens the front door, quickly apprises himself of the situation, and realizes this is a giant box of top shelf liquor, and says, yeah, I'm that guy, and takes possession of this box of fantastic liquor. So this is Christmas Eve day, and we don't know what happens, but the FBI SWAT team waited till 5:30 Christmas morning and then invaded the house and found Thomas passed out, drunk as a skunk, on the sofa. he wasn't much of a fight then. He was pretty still gone with the wind, so to speak. But what's the lesson? In this situation, when I talked to my dad about it, he goes, look, in high stakes situations, you're really trying to figure out what the safest, smartest way to go to succeed with the less damage to other people. Sure, you could look cool putting on your gear, your SWAT team stuff, busting down the door, what you're trained to do. He goes, but you're really trained to use your brain. How do you protect everybody in the situation with no injury, no risk? And it really taught me a big lesson that the smartest move isn't always the loudest. The right move is not the most vain and heroic. Sometimes you have to take a step back and go, okay, how can I do this that causes the least amount of harm? Now, I will quickly concede that I didn't always apply that lesson, and sometimes don't always apply the lesson, but it's a very powerful lesson, which was what's the smartest and safest way to succeed with the least damage, and realizing the smartest move isn't always the loudest, the most vain, the most heroic, but the most successful that causes the least amount of damage. So I thought you would enjoy that story. I've got a few more for you, and then I'll start to wrap up. The next story is how my father was a lifelong learner. My father was really masterful at doing different things, but he would become obsessed with particular topics like bowling. He became a master bonsai artist. He really had a tremendous bonsai collection, the little Japanese trees. He took our backyard on the free slave labor of my siblings and myself and transformed it from a really scrub bushy looking area into a beautiful Japanese garden, complete with koi ponds and waterfalls and bonsai trees. It was in its heyday quite amazing. Quite a few marriages occurred, ceremonies occurred back there. So it was pretty cool. But one of the things that changed my dad's life that really, I think, was quite profound, and I've shared this on other podcasts, was my father took a Dale Carnegie course. And he got a little bit of a budget from the FBI for self-development, self-improvement. And my father was like, okay, well, I don't want to go to take a college class because he'd done some of those. He didn't want to go out of town. And his friend at Rotary owned a Dale Carnegie franchise. And he was like, okay, well, I'll go do this. This can't be too bad. But I will tell you that crazy course, he didn't realize it. We didn't realize it. Utterly changed his life. The book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, his book, How to Stop Worrying and Start Living, and ultimately, and I'll show it to the screen, the Dale Carnegie book. And this is precious. My daughter found this. This is his course book from when he took the course. It's got his name on it, and more importantly, his notes. And he had exercise in there. I was about 15 at the time. And one of the exercises, who are you committed to having a breakthrough in a relationship with? And he wrote me, meaning son, Steve. And, I can't imagine at age 15 that my father and I were butting heads, but apparently we were. And he wrote an exercise out trying to figure out how to connect with me and communicate with me better. But a lot of quotes that my father would give us throughout the years actually came from Dale Carnegie. So the number one principle of don't complain, criticize, or condemn was something my dad would quote to me all of the time. And I thought it was wisdom from the sages, but it's actually wisdom from the Dale Carnegie course my dad took years and years ago. And it taught him how to live days in what Dale Carnegie calls airtight containers. And he would learn a gratitude practice from Dale Carnegie. And so every day he would ask, what are you grateful for today? Because sometimes you get stressed and upset about things. And he would ask, like, what are you grateful for today? And that, I think, became a really cool lifelong practice for me and a lifelong practice for my father that he continued from the time he took the course to the future. So what's the lesson? The work that you're doing today, the small investments, the small learnings, the listening to this podcast can shape lives in decades. That silly Dale Carnegie course changed his life, and it has called ripples throughout our lives. So the fact that you're taking the time to ask yourself, what is a great practice? What does a great life look like? And you're making small changes, you may not realize that that small change will shape your child's life like it shaped mine. So, what's my point? You're going to make some changes in your life, habit changes, mindset changes. You're going to set examples for your children by the behaviors that you're doing. And then maybe 50 years from now, something that you did as small as repeating a Dale Carnegie principle or a Dale Carnegie practice will show up in a conversation with one of your kids where they're like, my parents did this, and that particular practice actually shaped and colored my life. So keep doing what you're doing. Now, with that, I'm going to give you my final story and a closing fable. I don't think I can tell you lessons about my father's life without telling you the most significant person in his life, which I know you're not shocked by, is not me, but his wife of 52 years, my mom. Gertrude Catherine, which is what my father would call her when he was mad, and she would call him Donald Calvin when she was mad. But her nickname was Gus, or Gertie, none of which she really liked, but he would call her Gus or Gussie, and that's what her friends would call her. They met when my father was a police officer, and he was injured skiing in the Ohio River with his best friend, Bill Miller. And my mom was a nurse anesthetist, and she was there when they performed surgery on my dad's foot. And she came up to check on my dad later, a couple of days later, and was checking on him and left. And the head nurse who was there looked at my father and looked at my mom as she left and looked back at my father and goes, "Well, that's interesting." My father, like, "What?" He goes, "Nurse anesthetists never, ever check on their patients, ever." She goes, "I think she was checking you out more so than checking on you." So the story grows from there, of course. They were married. They were both hard workers. They both came from parents that were raised in the Great Depression or came out of the Great Depression. But, they were remarkable. They raised 4 kids, filled our home with what I called wonderful chaos. But we're hardworking people. The lesson that my father taught me was one of commitment. He worked until age 76. He could have kept working, but my mom's Alzheimer's gotten so bad that my dad decided to retire to care for her because he didn't want to leave her alone at the house anymore for fear that she might do something that would harm herself or be scared. So my dad, who, if you can imagine, as a former FBI agent and SWAT team commander, is not the most nurturing kind of caregiver, did his best to be a good husband and caregiver to my mom. Now, my amazing wife, Kristen, who more than likely will hear this podcast, at multiple times tried to persuade my parents to move to Tampa, where I was actively practicing and had built a very good practice. My father made the decision not to move. He wanted to keep her there in the house of, I think at the time, 35 years. They'd been in the house for 35 years. Total of 55 years in the house. My dad made the decision to keep her there because she knew the house, she knew the church, which she loved, which was down the road she could walk to, and she knew the area, and he just didn't want to move her. So we did the most logical thing, thanks to my wife, who made me regret ever teaching her the My Great Life Legacy exercise, the My Great Decade, the My Great Life conversation. Basically said, if we believe family is true north, then we need to go help your folks. Now, you have to understand, my father was opposed to me marrying Kristen. Almost didn't come to the wedding. He didn't think we were a fit. And he showed up to the wedding nonetheless because my mom threatened to divorce him. And his greatest regret was ever opposing our marriage because Kristen quickly became the favorite. And she is now known as Saint Kristen because she persuaded me to sell my practice, move my family across the state, buy a home 3 doors down from them, which I argued we paid twice for once we bought it, once we got done rehabbing it, to support my folks. And she didn't want to wait till we found the right house. She didn't want to wait. She, it was the right time. She moved during the summer. She moved in with my family. She moved in with my folks and lived there for a year as we found a house, rehabbed it, and then moved 3 doors down. And I found a buyer for the practice, and we did all this. But, gave up a very, very nice lifestyle in Tampa and a very lucrative practice. And she said to me, your parents need our help. And of course, me being the practical one, I'm like, yeah, but what about the practice? What about this? What about that? And my God, the woman then says something to me that haunts me to this day. She says, if you're as good as I think you are, you'll figure all the money out. You'll find another business. You'll find something else to do. You'll start another practice. But if we're really committed to your parents, this is what we got to do. And that's what we did. Sold the practice. And funny enough, that's how I ended up here with you. Because if I'd stayed in Tampa, I'd still be cranking. I would still be going at it. I wouldn't be at Atticus. I would not have been down the road from my folks. I would have not made the changes that I did in my mid 40s if it wasn't for Kristen saying I think this is the right thing to do. I probably would have lacked the courage and lacked the fortitude and chose the easy way out, which was to stay where I'm at or was at. So here's my point. My father's commitment to my mother and his commitment to her until she passed away in 2017. Commitment's a powerful thing. Commitment combined with courage is an incredible 1-2 punch, right? So my father's commitment to my mother and my wife's commitment to family really has reshaped and redefined who we are, who my kids are, and what my life's journey been about. And if it wasn't for her commitment and his commitment, we would not be having this conversation today. So, of course, being a lawyer that I am, I had to do research of the word commitment and its Latin and Roman meanings. And the word commitment is incredibly powerful in this context because it basically means to join together, to join something together. So committere, which is COMMITTERE, means to come together, to entrust, to join. So in my father's relationship with my mom, in the consequence of his commitment, I saw the profound commitment of my spouse, Kristen, and her devotion and our family's devotion to join together to the commitment of taking care of my mom. At her passing, that commitment closed. And with my father's passing, I guess that commitment closes. So my father would say two things to me all the time, all the time. One was, and he practiced this constantly when he was at the hospital the final month of his life. He was thanking people all the time. If a nurse came in or an aide came in or the doctor came in, if he could touch their hand, he would grab their hand and say, thank you. Thank you for taking care of me. Thank you for being here. Thank you. And he was always thanking me. And I go back to that stupid Dale Carnegie course and my dad's transformation to being a lifelong learner and transformation of gratitude and practicing gratitude and expressing gratitude to the moment he died. And then my father would also say this thing whenever I'd get stressed out about something. He said, son, relax. You work too hard, which is hysterical coming from a man who retired at age 76. He said, this too shall pass. This too shall pass, son. You won't know this yet, but the things that used to upset me as an FBI agent don't upset me anymore. And I think the greatest benefit to dementia for him was he started to forget my mom. And the pain of her loss was, quite frankly, something he never recovered from. And the fact that dementia started to take his memories and his past, he started to forget that she was ever there. So he was grateful day to day. But the most significant relationship of his life, dementia started to steal. And the silver lining was it stole the pain. So here's the lesson for you if you're up for it. What are you committed to? Who are you committed to? What in your great life are you committed to the end? And how are you living that commitment? How are you expressing that commitment? How's that commitment showing up for you today? And as we close this particularly painful expose of my life, in my relationship, I hope you take some things away, some lessons from my father's 92-year life. He would probably not tell you that he had a great life, but I think he did have a great life. Parts of his life were extraordinary. So here's my closing fable. Fable being what it is, a short fictional story designed to teach a moral lesson or convey universal truth. Fables work. Fables are powerful. What fables are you telling yourself that work? What fables do you need to create to help others have a great life? Here's my final fable for today's conversation. My fable is that my mom and dad, Don and Gus, are reunited, happy, healthy, in love, in the afterlife, whatever that means for you. So my fables are together. And what does this mean to you? What's this whole podcast mean to you? What's this whole conversation mean? That I would like to share with you life lessons from my father that may help you shape your great life, your great practice, give you permission to make up whatever fables that you need to help your clients, your staff, your team, your spouse, yourself. Because ultimately your great life is made up by the choices you make and the lessons you leave behind. And my father was right. For this too shall pass. He passed. I'll pass. You'll pass. And the weight we feel today won't be the weight we feel tomorrow. So make it count. Make that great life matter. Make those fables, whatever they may be, powerful and potent. And in my dad's honor, go out today with a smile like he always did and tell someone something that you appreciate about them, something that you find great about them, something that you love about them, something that you treasure. Don't threaten to turn them in for two 25-year-olds. It doesn't work, I promise. But go out and express gratitude today. Make your life great today. And from the bottom of my heart, thank you for being part of the Atticus community. Thank you for being part of our great life and our great practice. Talk to you next time. Thanks for joining this week's episode of Great Practice, Great Life. Please tune in weekly to get the next episode. If you enjoyed the episode, please subscribe, like, and don't hesitate to share it with a friend who you think this episode could help. With that, thanks, and I hope you enjoy next week's episode.